ReviewTyme is the home for all things theme parks. Stay up to date with our content by subscribing and turning on notifications. The late 20th century was a bizarre time for the theme park industry, as it seemed every major company wanted a studio within the gates of their upcoming theme parks. The Gold Coast, Orlando, Paris, and parts of Germany all had their own studio theme parks pop up just mere years from making their debut. The shift towards studios wasn't an entirely far-fetched move for the theme park industry, as movies are full of camera trickery, illusions, and special effects that could easily be adapted to theme parks. And adapted, they did. Many studio theme parks opened exploring special and practical effects, costuming, stunts, filming, and production, with each featuring a backlot in which guests could experience real live film production. We've seen many of these theme parks such as Universal Studios Orlando, Warner Bros. Movie World, and Disney's Hollywood Studios move away from the glamorous world of production and movie making to merely becoming a stomping ground for intellectual property and thrill rides. Review time, I'm Dominic, and today we'll be exploring the rise and fall of studio theme parks. Carl Laemmle, a German-American filmmaker and founder of Universal Pictures, debuted his Universal City Ranch to the public on March 15, 1915. With admissions costing just 25 cents, it allowed visitors the opportunity to explore his outdoor movie studio backlot and experience the emerging world of filmmaking, an art which was just starting to have a forefront in popular culture. Whilst a critical success with the tour providing a steady income for the studio, the emergence of sound in film led to Laemmle unfortunately closing the backlot to the noisy public in order to create a soundproof environment for their productions. Carl Laemmle would pass away in 1939, never seeing the backlot opened again to the public. It wouldn't be until 1961 that Universal would once again open their studio backlot to the general population. The new tour was outsourced to the Grey Line Bus Company, and with almost 50 years of movie experience and history, Universal had a lot to showcase on their backlot. Eventually, Universal would take further control over the tour, and just 3 years later, in July of 1964, Universal Studios Hollywood was officially opened with their own in-house tram tour. For just $2.50 per guest, visitors rode in glamour trams around the studio, visiting costuming departments, currently producing live sets, a star's dressing room, and eventually, a staged Western stunt show. The new endeavor proved to be a great success, and over the years Universal would expand on the attraction to turn Universal Studios Hollywood into a fully featured theme park experience. All the while over the years, Universal would continue to add to the tour, creating staged additions and attractions within the tram ride based on practical effects such as the flash flood scene in a Mexican village, and show scenes based on popular movies of the time such as King Kong and Jaws. As Universal Studios Hollywood grew, they realized the potential of a second studio theme park on the eastern coast of the United States after seeing the success of Walt Disney World and SeaWorld in Orlando, Florida. Universal Studios Florida was designed from the ground up as a theme park first, production studio second. This time around, the theme park would not contain a backlot, but would house production areas and sound stages for Universal and other film companies to utilize. With the major draw of the Hollywood park being its studio backlot tour, the new freedom provided by the large plot of land in Orlando allowed Universal to expand on the popular additions that were added to the studio tour. Jaws, King Kong, and other attractions all saw upgrades from sideshows on the studio tour to fully featured rides and experiences in Orlando. But Universal weren't the only major company to be scoping out for a studio theme park in Orlando. Disney MGM Studios was originally conceptualized by legendary Imagineer Mark Davis as a movie-themed pavilion expansion to Epcot. Michael Eisner, CEO of the Walt Disney Company, saw potential in the project and enhanced the attraction to become a fully featured theme park and studio. Dedicated to beat the opening date of Universal Orlando, the park debuted on May 1st, 1989, with Universal Studios Florida following closely in June of 1990. This was only the beginning of a huge wave of studio theme parks. Warner Bros. Movie World on the Gold Coast in Queensland, Australia, opened in June of 1991, adjacent to the existing Warner Roadshow Studio Complex, a functioning film studio and backlot. The park was designed by C.V. Wood, who had an impressive portfolio design in Disneyland and Six Flags Over Texas. Bavaria Film Park in Germany, which would later become Warner Bros. Movie World Germany, and then later after that, becoming Movie Park Germany, opened in 1992 by the Bavaria Film Company, one of the largest film production companies in Europe. Fox Studios Australia opened just outside Sydney's CBD in November of 1999 as a small backlot theme park, which we've covered in a previous video. And originally intended to open in 1996, the second park of the Disneyland Paris resort, Walt Disney Studios Park, would be delayed due to financial concerns spurred from poor attendance and reception of the neighbouring Disneyland Paris. At this point, the studio theme was still rather successful overseas, and instead of throwing out the plans, Walt Disney Studios Park opened in March of 2002. Park after park, each embraced the world of cinema and production, featuring brand new backlots, tours, production houses, and live sets interspersed with rides and attractions. Each studio park wanted to impress guests with better technology, more advanced tours, and most of all, memorable films being produced on their location. It was plain to see that there was definitely a trend happening globally, and this wasn't by mistake. The rapid insurgence of studio theme parks came about because it solved the primary problem regarding the current state of the theme park industry. That problem was money. Studio theme parks ultimately were cheap. Expectations for theme parks were rising, and the bar was already at an all-time high. Creating grand experiences that a guest can fully immerse themselves in is expensive and requires a lot of work. The studio theme provided a solution to that problem. Just like movies, theme parks could now direct guests' attention like cameras, and if guests were to look away from what the designers wanted you to see, they'd experience the magic of cinema with stage lights, plywood facades, sound stages, and the machines responsible for the special effects. Designers would no longer need to create grand and immersive locations, as any shortcut made would simply fit in with the theme of movie magic. It also meant that guests weren't just paying for the park, but production houses and film companies were paying for the use of the land as well. As studios filmed on their location, more guests would come, and in turn, more studios would be enticed. It was a double-edged sword that utilized the vast skills of theme park designers to create what companies saw as the ultimate theme park self-fulfilling profit machine. But the charm of beige sound stages would only last so long. If you visit many of the previously mentioned studio theme parks, many of them pay little attention to their studio roots. The world of cinema and production has been left behind for thrill rides and movie tie-ins. Aside from Universal Studios Hollywood, the backlot tours have been abandoned or replaced with new attractions exploring the worlds within cinema, instead of the world that is cinema. Theme parks such as Movie Park Germany and Warner Bros. Movie World in Australia have embraced large thrills and roller coasters. Even though Warner Bros. Movie World is still located next door to Village Roadshow Studios, where films such as Thor Ragnarok and Aquaman were filmed, the park pays little attention to its neighbour. Why did these studio theme parks move away from being studios in content to merely studios in name? It wouldn't take long before guests realised that the glamour of Hollywood was as heavily edited as the productions made within. The places where most movies were produced are simply the beige show buildings that you saw splattered around the studio theme parks, and the sets only looked good on camera. It was initially interesting to see how the facades were created, but after time, they gradually became cheap and hollow. The rise of updated technology saw a shift from video cassette tapes to digital DVDs being introduced in the late 90s. With the extra space provided on the new format, studios had the option to provide DVD extras, which gave viewers a glimpse behind the scenes of films and production. This new addition spoiled much of the movie magic for guests and removed a lot of the appeal to visit these studio theme parks. This would only become a further issue with the rise of YouTube and online video sharing. Many of these parks that tried to emulate Universal Studios Hollywood lacked the rich history that the studio had, leaving very little content in the backlots and experiences for people to put their excitement towards. Though many of these parks started with the ability to support full-scale productions, the expense and upkeep would prove to be too much for lack of interest from major productions. For many guests, these parks were merely facades just like the buildings they were presented within. Whilst it was initially exciting to visit a film studio and see how it all worked, the lack of immersive storytelling and experiences within the studio-based attractions created for dull revisability. The modern era of movie and studio theme parks is the consequence of an idea exploited with a lack of foresight. Companies have been left with a struggling theme, but are quickly reinventing themselves to move away from the studio idea and embrace the worlds which movies provide. Even Universal Studios continued on to create further theme parks around the world, but none after Florida would contain any actual production houses and would merely contain rides instead of studios. I doubt we will ever see a real studio theme park appear again in the future. Whilst it was exciting to see the world of cinema and theme parks combined widespread for a brief moment in history, for the best of both industries, leave the theme parks in Orlando and the movies in Hollywood. For ReviewTyme, I'm Dominic. Thanks for watching, liking, and subscribing. And cut.